The Civil War began on April 12, 1861, when Confederate batteries attacked Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor. On July 21, 1861, the First Battle of Bull Run was fought. It was a disaster for the Union. William Dougherty of Monroe County, Ohio, published the following 23 days later in his local newspaper, The Spirit of Democracy. Volunteers. Bounty to each soldier, $100. The undersigned is raising a company to serve during the war. Let all who are in favor of putting down rebellion and supporting the government report themselves immediately. This company will go into service under the most favorable auspices. William Dougherty, Jr., August 13, 1861. William was elected captain of Company K, 62nd Ohio Volunteer Infantry, the following spring, 1862. Later that summer, he sent a letter home to his hometown newspaper. Army Correspondence, written July 9, 1862, published August 6, 1862. From Captain William Dougherty. Dear Spirit, perhaps a few lines from the 62nd by this time would not be uninteresting to your readers. However this may be, I will give you a brief history of our late movements. To do so, I must go back at least to the 12th of May, when we left Newmarket for Fredericksburg, at which place we found ourselves safely landed after a long and dreary march of 10 consecutive days over a mountainous and unexplored country. Exposed to the rays of a burning sun by day and a drenching rain by night, being deprived of our tents prior to starting on the march, and it was often 11 o'clock at night before we halted, and then in some desert where wood could not be found within a mile, and perhaps after going for a fence, the distance, find it made of stone, so back we would come, but at a much slower gait than we went, deeply realizing the fact of going to bed supperless. But indeed few of us thought of cooking or eating either, for as soon as guns were stacked, the gun blanket was spread out without choice of ground, and the weary soldier, wrapped in his woolen one, would lie down to improve the time in sleeping, knowing he would be awakened at early dawn to prepare for the next day's march. And what was still worse than all, our rations were inferior in both quantity and quality. This, however, could not be avoided, for the roads were worse than worst, if possible, and hence transportation very difficult. After resting a couple of days at Fredericksburg, we were ordered on to Richmond, but no such good luck was then in store for us. Circumstances alter cases. For the first we knew the head of the column was turned toward the place from whence we came, and soon it began to leak out that we had to return to the valley, to encounter our old foe, Stonewall Jackson, who had taken advantage of our absence and was pressing the feeble corps of General Banks, and had already driven him across the Potomac. We made the trip back on a forced march in 7 days, coming via Manassas Junction, a very circuitous route. This time our power of endurance was tested thoroughly, but not a murmur escaped any lip. All were so eager to have another spot with Jackson. At Front Royal we found the enemy in possession of the town, but our shot and shell soon put them to flight. However, not until 150 of the lads were taken prisoner. From thence we proceeded up the Luray Valley, about 60 miles, resting several days by the way. At Luray, the 3rd and 4th Brigades were detached from the division and sent in advance to reconnoiter and burn a bridge near Port Republic. and by so doing cut off Jackson's retreat, who was then skedaddling before Banks up the other valley. But Carroll, who was in command of the brigades in question, made up his mind he could hold the bridge until reinforcements came up and went to make preparations, but was overpowered, and Jackson crossed the bridge with his whole force and then burned it, thus in a degree cutting off Banks. Next day, our two feeble brigades were attacked by the combined forces of Johnson, Ewell, and Jackson, and after 4 hours' desperate fighting were repulsed with fearful slaughter on both sides. You, of course, heard all about it. Therefore, I need not go into detail. Suffice it to say, the Ohio troops did their duty nobly and covered themselves with immortal glory. When we, the rest of the division, came up and formed in battle line, the enemy fell back without manifesting any disposition to bring on another engagement. Our leaving the valley in the first place seems to have been rather an unfortunate move, and not only attended with privation and sickness, the result of forced marches and constant exposure, but disaster. There is surely a fearful responsibility resting on somebody. But who is it, is the question. Such is war. However, from Port Republic we were ordered back to Front Royal. Here we had marched about 400 miles and were promised rest, but we had been there only 2 days when we got marching orders again. And in 3 days afterwards, we were at Manassas. Here we stayed 2 days, and took the cars for Alexandria, where we arrived the same evening. All were in fine spirits, being tickled with the idea of going to Arrington Heights to rest and recruit up a month or 2. But behold, the contrast the next morning brought about. At 6 a.m., the 62nd was on board the steamer John Tucker. And after a pleasant trip of 2 days down the Potomac and Chesapeake Bay to Fortress Monroe, and from thence up the James River, we arrived at Harrison's Bar on the evening of the 2nd. That night we encamped on a farm and close by the house of which General Harrison was born. The farm contains 4,000 acres, and is principally covered by the Army of the Potomac, since McClellan changed his base of operations. Next morning we were taken to the front and put on picket duty, where and which in position we remained 2 days, skirmishing with the enemy's pickets all the time, many of whom bit the dust, while others were captured during our stay in the vicinity of rebel lines. We are now at the rear on the banks of the James River, a very agreeable change too, on account of water. We had a rare kind of celebration on the morning of the 4th, which I will mention here. The 67th and the 62nd Ohio Regiment lay together, the 67th on our left. We had about 200 pickets a little in advance, while the balance of the regiment lay asleep, and by some means a party of rebels got on our left and poured a cowardly volley into the sleeping ranks, and then made their escape. Both regiments spring to arms in a moment, most of them yet asleep, no doubt, and began firing in all directions. The left wing of the 67th fired into the right. The 62nd behaved well and fired but little, for which we were highly commended by the colonel. The 67th had 8 men wounded and 3 killed. The 62nd had 1 wounded. Lieutenant Adair of Company G was shot in the breast and will probably die. He was a noble officer and had no enemies. The weather here is most intensely hot, the thermometer 95 degrees in the shade. The health of the troops is as good as could be expected, considering climate, location, and the amount of duty performed. The men are all in fine spirits and eager for the contest which is impending before Richmond. Although the 62nd never has been in a general engagement, it has always been where duty called, and has often held the post of danger. We have as good a colonel as ever led a regiment into battle. He has won for himself a place in the heart of every man in the regiment. We have the most implicit confidence in him, and will stand by him to the last. I have as good a company, was going to say the best in the regiment. My boys are always found first at their post, and last in leaving it. They have given satisfaction to their officers, and won for themselves a good reputation, which they are bound to retain to the last. Monroe and Perry counties may well feel proud of Company K of the 62nd. We deeply regret that Lieutenant H.R. West has been compelled to stop at Alexandria to recruit his health, by order of the surgeon. He is a promising young officer, and does his duty nobly on all occasions. We get but few papers here, and hence know little of what is going on. We hear nothing but the booming of cannon, the din of arms, and the bustle and confusion of tens of thousands of soldiers. We get an occasional copy of the Spirit, which is always gladly received. Yours in haste, William Dougherty, Captain Company K, 62nd Ohio Volunteer Infantry.